Yo, what's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the show. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Kevin Smith. Today's episode is going to be a quick overview of my new running program. It is called the 2 and 5 mile running improvement program. Very, very original name. Had to think long and hard to come up with that one, and finally came up with a banger. No, just kidding. I figured just to keep things simple, I would name it exactly what the intent of the program is, which is, if you couldn't guess, to improve your 2 and 5 mile run time. So this episode, the main purpose of it is going to be, I get lots of questions on all of my programs in my DMs, emails, other places like that. And I simply don't really have the ability to get back to every single person in a timely manner, like when they want it. So instead, I'm just going to make this episode that goes over the entire program. Nothing crazy. I'm not going to get too into the details, but I will provide an overview of what it looks like that I can point people. I can use this episode to point people in the right direction where they can listen to it and figure out what they need to about the program, just to answer some what I know will be FAQs in the future. And so I'm going to go over each of the components of it. I'm going to talk about who's the program for, who's the program not for. I'm going to talk about each phase, talk about some specific things within each phase. I'm also going to talk about some ways that you can make the program more effective. And I'm finally going to end it with what you can expect out of the program in regards to improving your run times and why that is a very difficult question to answer because it depends on a lot of different variables, which I'll get into. So with that out of the way, what do we got here? What is this program? It is a program for those intending to enhance their 2 and 5 mile running ability. I chose those specific distances. Anyone who is in the Army probably knows exactly why, but the military, especially the Army, tests runners on those specific distances. The ACFT includes the 2 mile run, and most special operations, pipelines, and or Ranger School and some other schools like that also test guys on the 5 mile run. And generally speaking, military athletes usually struggle a little bit with running. Most guys are not naturally great runners. And to be a really good runner in the Army is different than being a really good runner compared to really good runners, compared to high level runners. You don't have to be burning down 25-minute 5 miles. You don't have to be burning down 10-minute 2 miles. But you do need to meet a certain standard, and most guys want to get faster. So I made the program for that specific reason. It is not necessarily intended for people who are training for a 5 mile race or training for a 2 mile race or training for a 5K or anything like that, because it also has a strength component to the program. The strength work is different than some of my other hybrid programs like Jacked Gazelle or T850 in that it is intended to support the running, but it's still more strength work than I would do if I only cared about running. I would probably do strength work similar to phase 2, which I'll get into here in a second. But I would do a little bit less volume, a little bit less intensity. My strength work would be very, very minimal because I'd run more miles and I'd run more days per week if I was only preparing for a run. But I know that most people in my audience are in the military or looking to go into the military, and therefore they need to be good at more things than just running. But again, the main goal is not to get really good at the squat, bench, deadlift like it would be in Jacked Gazelle, but you will make much better running improvements in this program, running specific improvements. And the strength work, which I'll get into some details later, should be enough to maintain your strength. It's not super high volume. I don't really put high volume in almost any of my programs. I don't really believe in training with tons and tons of volume. I am more of an intensity guy anyway, but especially the case when you're also doing a good deal of running, which I'll get into specific how much running you can expect to do, as well as what days you can expect to do them, as well as the types of runs that are included in the program. So other things, this program is not, it's not an ACFT prep program. However, if you have ACFTs and you follow this program, you should be totally fine. There are certain movements in the program that also occur on the ACFT, to include the hand release push-ups. There's some plank work. There's some hex bar deadlift work. And of course, the run, it'll definitely help your 2 mile run time. There is no ball throw. There is no sprint drag carry work or anything like that. Generally speaking, if you're a really good runner, you'll do fine, and you're decently strong, you'll do fine on the sprint drag carry. And if you struggle with the ball throw, you probably should practice the ball throw and get stronger and improve your power and improve your technique. The ball throw is a little bit complicated, but if you're relatively athletic and you practice it a few times and you're strong and you do some power training, which in this program, there is some power work, and I'll explain why as I go through, then you'll be totally fine on the ACFT. I don't believe in training for the ACFT. The ACFT is basically a check on learning, except the learning in this case is your training. If you train consistently the right things and you're a well-rounded individual military athlete, you should be totally fine on the ACFT, like at a moment's notice. My first ACFT, I got like an 8-hour notice right before I went to bed. I received a text, you have the ACFT tomorrow morning at 06. And I had trained, I believe I had done repeats and an upper body session the day prior. So I was pretty sore. My chest was sore. My legs were a little sore and tired. And I still got a 600 on it because my year-round training was such that it allowed me to, at a moment's notice, go and do well on the ACFT, even if it was my first ACFT that I ever took. That may not, you don't necessarily have to get a 600. Most people don't get 600s, but that's just an example of training appropriately year-round and maintaining a level of fitness that will allow you to perform well when you get tested on your fitness. So every time I see an ACFT prep program, I die a little bit inside, but to each their own. It's not a selection prep program. However, this wouldn't be a bad program if you struggle with running and you are 6-ish months out from selection. You could follow this program into SFAS prep program. You could follow this program as like a break from Jacked Gazelle. You could also follow Jacked Gazelle into SFAS prep if you're looking to gain strength and running ability, just not quite as much of the running ability because this is just more running focused. And again, it's not a program for those who are only interested in running and don't care about any other fitness modality. They just want to get a really fast 5K and they don't really care about lifting or strength or anything like that. So this is mainly for military personnel that get tested on 2 mile, 5 mile, etc. If you're a Marine and you get tested on the 3 mile, guess what? This is probably going to work for you. Maybe a little bit high on the volume and a little bit long on the tempo stuff, but you could either make small adjustments to it and dial things back or shorten the tempos and speed them up a little bit, or you could just follow it to a T and you'll still be, if you can run 5 miles fast, you can also run 2 miles fast. And on that note, or 3 miles fast. And on that note, this program's a little bit more focused on 5 mile improvement because I always tell guys, if you focus on the 5 mile, you get really good at the 5 mile. Guess what? When you have to run 2/5 of it, you'll be totally fine on that as well. Your per mile pace will be faster than it would be on the 5 mile. There is definitely some sessions based on your 2 mile pace. Most of the repeats, if not all of the repeats, are based on your 2 mile pace, but pretty much everything else is based on your 5 mile pace minus the slow and the easy runs. So what does the program look like? It starts with a pretty intense and comprehensive overview of what you're going to expect to see in the program. So I am not a huge fan when I purchase other people's programs and it's just on a Word doc and it doesn't really have any explanations of anything. It just kind of jumps into the program. If I were to make programs like that, I could pump out programs in a day or two. I just write it out on the actual programming portion of it. If I just wrote it out on a Word document, would take me an hour, maybe, if that. But because I like detail and my wife is very good at making things look nice and we like to produce a really good product that has a lot of prerequisites, information, an overview of the entire program, a bunch of FAQs, exercise demos, etc. There are approximately 15 pages of all of that stuff that I just mentioned before you even get into the program. So I just value making things detailed, and most of my programs have this, by the way, but because I get lots of questions, specific questions on that, I like to be able to, in advance, predict what questions I'm going to be getting and put them all there so that I can just refer people to that, or people can, before they ask questions, ideally read through that and then ask the question if the intro and the FAQs didn't answer your question. So that's the first several pages. Like I said, it goes over an overview of all of the different types of speed work. It goes through the tempo runs. It goes through how to pace things. It goes through how to track zone 2. It goes over how to determine your paces, how to determine the rest periods, basically how to execute each day, each workout, so that you are getting the most out of the program. And I'll get into some specifics on what I'm talking about in that regard as we go through. So if you do purchase the program, please read through the beginning. It's really not that much to ask, and it should answer most of the questions you have that may come up throughout the program, because I go over it with a fine-tooth comb and I think of these things and I write them in there in advance. So the structure of the program, the one thing I really want to emphasize, if you are not someone who runs regularly and you don't have a great running base and you haven't done that yet, I would probably listen to episode 95 where I talk about why it's important to build a running base and how to build a running base. But also in the program at the very beginning, before we even get into like week 1, day 1, I have a base phase. It's not a base phase for that everyone needs to follow to a T or all the way. For example, if you're running already a little bit, I talk about how to implement the base phase, not starting from scratch. I also talk about how to implement the base phase when you are starting from scratch. So depending on where you're at, depending on what you've been doing for running recently, that will give you good criteria on whether the base phase is necessary for you or not. How long will it take? It depends on where you're at. If you are starting from scratch, it probably will take you 8 to 10 weeks or so, depending on how you're feeling throughout, how you're progressing. I give special certain criteria on how to increase your volume each week. Usually it's going to be either add 5 minutes to each run each week. There's going to be 4 runs per week in the base phase starting at 20 minutes. You either add 5 minutes to each run up until you hit 150 minutes or so of easy running. And I also suggest if you are getting up to 150 minutes of zone 2, but you're not able to at least run slowly throughout the entire thing, like if you have to walk in order to stay in zone 2, ideally I would get to where you can run the entire 150 minutes per week in zone 2 before you launch into phase 1, day 1. The reason being, if half of your time is spent walking to stay in zone 2, you probably don't have a sufficient base to handle the volume and the intensity of the actual program. And therefore you want to wait until you get to where you can run for 150 minutes per week. This is not a single session. You'll see if you order the program, you'll see the very specific ways to build your base. But if you can run that 150 minutes, you can be pretty sure that you are ready for that program, ready to start day 1, phase 1. It also talks about touching on speed. So I think as part of a base phase, it's important to start to quote unquote touch on speed. And touching on speed doesn't mean do structured speed work. It doesn't mean go and run 800s, 400s, or anything like that. I have examples of this in there, but pretty much touching on speed means either throughout your long runs, your easy runs, you speed up a few times to what you think your goal 5 mile pace might be, or an RPE 7, 7.5, maybe 8. Or after your run, you run some strides. Or after your run, you run some hill repeats. Not all out sprints, not all out, not super structured, but little portions of speed that are going to be faster than your easy runs. That way you get your body accustomed to running fast, but not in a super fatiguing way. And should you start that immediately if you have no run base? No, you definitely want to start running slow and ease into it later on. And the specifics are all in there. If you've been building a base for a while and you just need a little bit more to touch up on your base before you jump into it, you absolutely can start touching on speed for a session or 2 per week with some strides or hills or pickups throughout the run. Again, all that stuff in detail is going to be in there. So if you don't understand everything I just said, no big deal. Just read through it in the program and it will tell you. But highly suggest if you are unsure about your base, spend a little time building on it, because the cost of not building a base is not only potential injury, which is definitely a real thing. Running is a kind of a high risk activity if you don't approach it properly, but a very safe activity if you do approach it appropriately. The problem is most people don't approach it appropriately, and therefore they get hurt, and therefore they blame running and not their approach to running, which it's the other way around, usually, in most cases. Of course, things happen and bad luck happens, but usually it's because they didn't do something right. But the other cost of not building a base is you're just not going to make as much progress as you otherwise could. If you start doing a bunch of speed work, not with an aerobic base, and again, I would listen to episode 95 as to why all this stuff's important, then you're just not going to make the progress you otherwise could. So definitely don't skip over that if it applies to you. If you've been running a bunch and you have a great base, you don't need to do the base phase. You can jump into day 1, week 1. On that note, let's talk about the program. So the program is broken down into 2 phases. Phase 1 is 6 weeks long. Week 7 is going to be a test week where you test your 2 and 5 mile time to establish a new baseline as you go into phase 2. Phase 2 is 5 weeks. And then after the test week of week 7, there's a deload week of running. So in week 7, When you do your test week, that's a deload from lifting. And then you go into week 8, which is a null week. I actually have it as a null week. It doesn't even count as part of the program, but you should still absolutely do it. That is when you will do a deload from running, like a serious deload from running after 6 weeks of training and testing your new 2 and 5 mile before getting into phase 2. But you will also only lift twice. And in phase 2, there's only 2 lifting sessions. Phase 1, there's 3. And then phase 2 is going to be 5 weeks long, followed by an optional test week. Now, if you get to the end of phase 2 and say you have ACFT or a 5 mile or something that involves these runs, you can just use that as your new test. I wouldn't test them and do that. Or say it's 2 weeks away. You can take a little deload, dial it back a little bit so you're a little less fatigued and you're probably going to be even faster. And you can do this either way. If you want to get your best possible 5 mile and your best possible 2 mile, you might consider taking the deload from week 8 or null week and doing that after the entire program's done and then doing your test the following week. You might get better results. Totally up to you. There's enough days off between the last day of training in the last week of phase 2 and the first time trial in the post-program time trial week to get really good times and be happy with them. But probably even better would be to take a little week between those and do your time trials or get tested on your run times after that. So let's break down the phases a little bit more in detail. So phase 1, there's going to be 4 runs per week and there's going to be 3 full body lifting sessions. The running intensity in phase 1 is a little bit lower than it is in phase 2. And therefore, that's why there's 3 lifting sessions. So lifting is going to be Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Monday's a lower body focused full body lift. So it's a full body lift, but a little bit more biased towards the lower body. Wednesday is an upper body biased full body lift. So full body lift, a little more biased towards the upper body. And then Friday is more of a calisthenics / plyometric day. That also involves some hex bar deadlifts, but it's a bunch of jumps, hops, and calisthenics maintenance, push-ups, pull-ups, and a little bit of hex bar deadlifting. The main reason I have plyos and jumps in there is to enhance your running capacity, your durability. When you properly implement hops, skips, jumps, lands, etc., in a structured manner that makes sense and that abides by the principles of power style training and training to enhance your ability to absorb impact while running, you are more likely to develop resilience to the stress of the impact of running and therefore minimize the risk of injury. Additionally, endurance running is very much counter to developments in power. And because of the way I have power work structured, jumps, throws, skips, etc., it is going to be very low fatigue. So if you are able to do a little bit of power maintenance throughout, you kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone. You improve your ability to handle impact, your durability, and you also maintain your power, because power is an adaptation that you lose pretty quickly when you don't train it. And especially that's the case if you are doing a lot of endurance running at the same time. That kind of competes with power a little bit. So that's the main reason for it. Again, very low fatigue, beginning of your workout, super easy, and it's a nice warm up to get into some compound lifts. The running in phase 1 is going to be 4 days per week, like I said. Mondays are going to be repeats. Most weeks, they're going to be flat track style repeats. You don't have to do them on a track, but 400s, 800s, etc. And then every 3 weeks or so, there will be a hill repeat day to allow to still improve your speed, but also reduce the impact a little bit. Hills are just lower impact. I talk about this all the time. You typically don't want to do hills every week, but you absolutely should and can break up the weekly repeat work, the flat repeat work with a hill day just to enhance recovery a little bit. Day 2 is going to just be an easy recovery style run. Although I usually don't recommend recovery runs for most people if you're training for a bunch of different things. In the context of a running program, it absolutely can be beneficial. The main thing you want to do is make sure you're going really easy. There will be explanations on how to do that, but pretty much you want to be low zone 2, maybe zone 1. If you're feeling banged up, absolutely great idea to not run and do some other form of recovery cardio, non-impact, or an incline walk or something like that. But the main intent for this run is to get a little bit more running volume, but at a very low intensity and kind of get some blood flow to the lower body, but still allow you to get a little bit of volume accumulation. Day 3 is going to be an optional non-impact day, or if you have the need to maintain your rucking, you can do a ruck on this day. That is another thing about this program. There's very little to no rucking. There's one optional ruck per week. So if you have goals to get faster running and also rucking, what I recommend doing is doing the ruck on the Wednesday, but also considering at least some weeks doing the ruck instead of the long run, which I'll get into the details of the long run here in a second. But that'll make the run gains a little bit slower, but you'll also get more time under a ruck. And for some people, that may be applicable. So it's totally up to you, and it's totally up to what you think you need to be good at. But I suggest ideally sticking to just the runs and not doing the ruck on Wednesday even. But that is, realistically speaking, some people may need to maintain their rucking, and that would be the day to do it. When you do this ruck, you don't want to ruck run. Please walk. If you add ruck running to this, it's probably going to be a little bit more stress than what you can recover from, most likely. Everyone's a little different, but that's a lot of impact throughout the week. Day 4 is the big 5 mile day. So that's your tempo runs. They're going to increase in duration each week by 2 to 3 minutes. The tempo day is super important. A lot of people mess this up. They turn their tempos into a time trial, and your tempo should not feel like a time trial. There's very detailed explanation on what the tempo pace should look like. There's actual ways to pace it, and there's also an explanation of a question to ask yourself when you're done. And that question is, could I have run another 15 minutes at that same pace that I just finished my tempo run? If so, you ran it up at a pretty solid pace. If you couldn't run another 5 minutes or another 500 meters, then you ran way too hard. And when you go too hard on tempo work, although doing it one time is usually not an issue, if you do it every week, you're not going to get faster because you're just eating into your recovery too much. So tempos should be comfortably hard. They should be somewhere between what it feels like to run an 800 meter repeat and an easy run, somewhere in between that. And again, I have very specific pacing strategies for that, but just wanted to emphasize the fact that you should adhere to that and as best you can. Not everyone's going to be perfect first time through, first week, first 2 weeks maybe. There's going to be a little bit of a familiarization period where you just get used to these things, but definitely stick to paces and your progress will be a lot better. Day 5 is just the plyos and calisthenic lift, no run. And then day 6 is the long run. In phase 1, the long runs are mostly just slow. There are a couple of runs with speed ups, basically intra run strides. And that'll be explained in the program where you speed up a few times to a certain goal pace and you go from there. One thing I didn't mention is if you have not run a 2 mile and a 5 mile time trial recently, you'll want to do that sometime before you start the program. And it goes over this in the intro, but if you have no idea what your 2 mile pace is or your 5 mile pace, if you haven't done it in the last few weeks or so, then you probably want to do a 2 mile and a 5 mile before you go in, because all of the speed work sessions, all of the tempo sessions, threshold sessions are based on your 2 and 5 mile time trials. So I would definitely do that. If you haven't, definitely should have covered that first, but keep that in mind as you go through. And then day 7 is a rest day. So that is an overview of phase 1. The runs, again, are repeats, easy run, tempo work, followed by a long run, 4 days. And the lifts are full body lower, full body upper, and plyos and deadlifts and calisthenics. Then we get into a time trial week. That time trial week is going to be where you test your 2 mile progress as well as your 5 mile progress. But you're not only testing your progress, you're also establishing a baseline going into phase 2. So that week will be dialed back lifting. Only 2 days throughout the week you'll lift, and a set is dropped from every main exercise. And the following week is the null week, the deload week. Very much reduced running volume and some non-impact cardio, as well as 2 days a week lifting before we hop into phase 2. So phase 2, the main differences in phase 2, only 2 lifts. And the main reason for that is because the running intensity is increased in phase 2. I'll get into what the specific runs look like, and you'll kind of learn why. The lifting volume is decreased. So day 1, you will have just repeats, no lift on the repeat day. So I would expect, not only because you've been following the program for 7-8 weeks, but also because you're doing them on their own day without having lifted before, without having lifted a lower body focused full body lift prior to. I would expect your repeat performance to be a lot better in phase 2 because you're doing them after a rest day, assuming you do Monday through Sunday. This would be after Sunday. You can do it any day of the week, but most people usually start their training blocks on Mondays and kind of have Sunday as a rest day. And this program has day 7 which is usually going to be Sunday as a rest day. So you're going to be more fresh for your repeats, and you're also going to be more fit because you're in phase 2 and you just finished phase 1. So you'll do repeats. These repeats are going to be a little bit longer, a little higher in volume, longer in distance, as well as there will be some days where you have basically mixed distance repeats. So you might have like 1Ks plus 400s or something like that as you go through. It's going to change up a little bit, and it's going to slowly progress in volume. Rest periods will change a little bit what you do during the rest period. In phase 1, you start with just walking during the rest period. By the time you finish phase 2, you're going to be doing incomplete rest periods. There are also, that day is optional calisthenics. So you can do push-ups and planks, pull-ups if you want. You can also do some tib raises and calf raises. Tib raises and calf raises are great movements. You're going to see that throughout the program. They're great movements to just strengthen your lower legs. Lower leg injuries are super duper common, but when you do the work to enhance your strength in your lower legs, you slightly reduce your risk of injury, and you also improve your ankle mobility and things like that. So definitely, absolutely can do that if you'd like. If you don't have an ACFT or anything coming up and you don't really care for it, you really just want to focus on running, you don't have to do that. That's just an optional day. Day 2 is going to be a full body lift and an easy run. It's a little more balanced, the lift between upper and lower, both lifting days are, just because there's only 2 lifting days, but it's a little bit more lower dominant. Day 3, rest. So we have an extra rest day in phase 2. That sounds a little bit backwards, doesn't it? Well, the main reason is, and you'll hear why in a second, the running intensity is higher in phase 2, as well as the volume. So I am allowing for another rest day, plus the day after, day 4, Thursday, you are going into a fartlek day for most of the weeks. And in a couple of the weeks, it'll be hill repeats again. This time on day 4, a little bit longer hill repeats, a little bit higher volume, again, for the same reasons as week 1 or as phase 1, because hills allow you to still get that really good hard work in, but it's less stressful on the joints and easier to recover from. So I break the day 4 session up with hill repeats every so often. Day 5 is a upper body biased full body lift. So just a lift. And then day 6 is going to be different in phase 2. It's going to be a long run, but most of the long runs in phase 2 either have intra run strides where you speed up for a longer period of time throughout the run, every so often up to your recent 5-mile pace. And you hold that for 90 seconds to 2 minutes. It'll say it in the program. But basically, you're getting good stimulus from a long run, but you're also touching on speed. And on other weeks, you will be doing a longer run with a tempo portion, a longer tempo portion than what the speed ups would be. So for example, you might do a 60-minute run with a 30-minute easy run warm up, but it's more of just a base building aerobic run. And then you'll do 15 minutes at tempo pace. And the tempo pace is going to be a little bit slower because I factored in the fact that A, it's the 6th session of the week. It's the 6th day of the week. So you're going to be a little fatigued. And B, you're also going to have run longer prior to starting that tempo portion. So the tempo portion is going to be a little slower than the tempo work in phase 1. That just occurs after a brief warm up, 10 to 12 minute easy run warm up. So that is to get more time running fast, as well as to spend a bunch of time at an aerobic pace, building that base, but also touch on speed. So the main reason that I have less lifting and I have 2 rest days in this phase is because that run is going to be more intense in phase 2 than it will be in phase 1. So you will do that for 5 weeks. Phase 2 is 5 weeks long. And then after phase 2 is the test week where you test your performance on the 2-mile and the 5-mile, and the program is over. Or you can take that week as a deload and do it after. Or if you have a test coming up, I wouldn't recommend testing your runs the week before and then doing the actual tests that you need to perform well in after, because time trials are very mentally and physically taxing. So you want to use those sparingly and not do them all the time. There's a massive difference between training and testing. All right, so that's the program. That's the way it's structured. Just a brief touch up on strength work. Again, you are not doing this program to get as jacked and as strong as possible. The strength work is mainly to maintain your strength and also enhance your running ability and kind of be a complement to the running plan. The volume is relatively low, especially for lower body, but also for upper body, just because high volume in the gym will be another thing you have to recover from. And if you're trying to get really good at running and you have a bunch of volume to recover from lifting, that's going to interfere with your ability to recover from your runs and therefore your overall ability to make as much progress as possible on the runs. So Strength work, low volume, high intensity. Definitely recommend high intensity, like pushing sets pretty hard. There's explanations, very detailed explanations on how hard to push your strength work. But the rep ranges are going to be relatively low for most lower body lifts, moderate to low for most upper body lifts. And again, pretty low volume, not a ton of sets. But I am very intentional with the certain lifts that I put in there. My entire exercise demo page has clips to my YouTube demos of each movement, as well as every single lift that's on there has a bunch of exercise substitutions that you can choose from if you see a certain lift in there that you don't handle well or that you want to change out. So that is the strength work. Again, pretty minimal, but definitely still there. And you should be able to largely maintain almost all of your strength. Some people, if you are newer to fitness in general, some people might even gain strength and get faster at the same time, but it's not necessarily a hybrid program. So if you're more advanced, just think of the strength work as strength maintenance and really focus on the run, but still, put good effort into the strength work. All right, so let's get into some ways to make this program more effective. Number one, I highly recommend against playing program Tetris, and that could have two kind of meanings. One, moving days around, switching the days that you do certain lifts. The sessions are the way that they are for a very intentional reason: to manage intensity, manage fatigue, manage recovery, manage volume. And when you move stuff around, it will make the program less effective. Not the end of the world if you have to, but highly suggest you don't have to start on Monday, but I highly suggest doing day one on day one, day two on day two, day three on day three, etc. Whatever day you want to start. Also suggest the other way to mess it up by playing Tetris is to add other programs to it, or add certain exercises to the lifting days, or add mileage, or mess around with paces or stuff like that, where you just kind of try and plug and play things. And unless you're very, very knowledgeable about programming and fitness, I highly suggest not doing that. Not the end of the world. If you have a lifting program that you want to follow and it's 3 days a week or less, and it's not crazy high volume, and you know what you're doing, and you know how to listen to your body, and you have at least a good solid base knowledge of programming and fitness, you definitely can do that. But I highly suggest not doing that. The less Tetris you play, the more effective the program will be. I can promise you that. Number two is definitely stick to the paces. It is very, very easy and tempting to go faster when you see certain paces or certain pace ranges on how to pace your repeats or how to pace your tempo or your threshold work. If you do this, you're probably going to feel a little bit more accomplished in your session, but multiply that by 12 weeks in a running intensive program, and you're not going to make the progress that you want, because it's going to interfere and impede with recovery a lot more if you are pushing the paces too hard. The most common ways to mess this up: a lot of people are used to running repeats at their goal pace. But if you are, for example, running a 14-minute 2 mile right now, that's a 7-minute mile, and your goal is 12-minute 2 mile, which is a 6-minute mile, and you immediately start running your repeats at that pace, that is way too big of a gap between your current pace and your goal pace. So I have very specific ways to calculate what your repeat pace should be for different durations and different distances of repeats based on your current time. It's going to be a little faster than your current time, not all the way to your goal pace. It might be, if your goal pace is only 10 seconds a mile faster than what you are at right now, if you're more advanced and you just want to get a little bit faster, then maybe it'll be your goal pace. Maybe it'll overlap. But in general, stick to the paces and you'll be much better off. You'll be less fatigued and you're less likely to injure yourself, and you'll get more progress. You'll make more progress. Listen to your body. This is more running than probably a lot of people are used to. Obviously, it's a running program, so it's got to have plenty of running in it. So definitely listen to your body. If you are feeling banged up, nothing wrong with subbing in a low or non-impact cardio modality for some of the days. If you need a deload week a little bit early, you can take the deload week a little bit early. If you need to take a few days off, and if you're feeling banged up, maybe you're not sleeping well, you got joint pain, you're feeling low motivation to train or something like that, those are all potential signs that you might need a deload. Instead of taking a deload week, you could also just take 3 or 4 days off and then start where you left off. That's totally fine as well. Definitely listen to your body, listen to your joints, track your progress. If you're not making progress, you're not getting faster, or if you're getting slower, then you're probably overdoing something. It probably, maybe, in most cases, it's not going to be the actual program. Usually it's something outside the gym that you're doing, or something you're slapping onto the program, or you're not going at the right paces, you're going too fast, adding extra volume to the lifts, something like that. Which brings us into the next one: prioritize sleep, nutrition, recovery. Following this in a deficit is going to be pretty rough. It can be done, but It should be a very, very mild, moderate deficit. Being smaller absolutely can help your run time, but the way most people go about losing weight and losing fat is not really the way I would recommend. You want to be in a very moderate deficit, very, very slow weight loss. Ideally, you follow this around maintenance, maybe even a surplus, depending on the person, depending on what your goals, but you absolutely need to eat plenty of protein. You need to prioritize carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are going to fuel most of these sessions. And if you're trying to do this on a low carb or low calorie diet, it's not going to go very well for you. And you definitely want to ensure that you're eating plenty of protein. Even though this is not a get jacked, gain muscle program, protein helps with muscle repair. And you're going to be breaking down your muscles when you do these runs and when you do all the sessions. So you absolutely want to eat close to a gram per pound of body weight of protein, maybe a little bit under, but you don't want to be eating half a gram or anything like that, or you're just not going to recover very well. But carbohydrates, I can't emphasize this enough. Please eat plenty of carbohydrates. If you want to read more about why carbohydrates are important, I suggest checking out my newly released SOF Selection Prep Recovery Guide that has all the information you could ever want about how to make sure you're eating enough carbohydrates to perform well and recover well. Even though it's called SOF Selection Recovery Guide, it is also for anyone who's looking to enhance their recovery. It just talks about the big components of enhanced recovery. And hint, it is not foam rolling and it's not doing mobility. It's sleeping, eating, and managing your stress. So definitely prioritize those things and you will be much better off. You'll recover better. You'll feel better throughout the day and you'll perform better. All right. So let's get into some expectations because I know people are going to ask about this, like how much time can I expect to cut off my 2 mile? How much time can I expect to cut off my 5 mile, etc.? And the answer to that is it depends on lots of different factors. It depends on your genetics. It depends on how much you're running now. It depends on your running history, your running experience, your running form. It depends on what you do outside the gym. It depends on how closely you adhere to the program or not. Probably the biggest thing that it depends on is where you're at right now, your current running ability. If you're a very novice runner and you don't have a lot of experience and you're really, really slow, you're in luck. You're probably going to make much more progress than someone who is a more advanced runner and is already pretty damn fast, already has well faster than the standard times, but just wants to get faster. Just like any fitness discipline, the more seasoned you are, the longer you've been doing it, the smaller the deltas will be in your progress. You're just going to have smaller improvements. That's just the way fitness works. A bodybuilder, a professional bodybuilder, if he were to gain a pound of lean muscle in an entire off season going into his next show, he would be super pumped about it. And these guys are not natural either. They're using PEDs. If they gain a pound or two of muscle, they're super excited. If you've never trained before, you might gain 10 to 15 pounds of muscle in your first 6 months of training if you have decent genetics and you follow a good program. Similar things happen with running. The slower you are and the less advanced you are, the more you're going to improve. The faster you are and the more advanced you are, the less you're going to improve. That's just the way it is. So I don't feel super comfortable giving a one-size-fits-all answer because that would just be a really low integrity thing. But I will give some ranges of what you can expect based on your current running ability. I'm going to break it down into newer runner, more seasoned runner, so kind of a mediocre average runner, and then a more advanced runner. I highly doubt anyone who's going to be a competitive or elite runner is going to follow this program. So that's what I'm going to break the groups down into. So newer, more novice runner, you could expect probably somewhere in the range of 1 to 3 minutes off of your 2 mile and 3 to 6 minutes off of your 5 mile. The longer the run, the more room for improvement you have. The shorter the run, the less room for improvement you have. A more seasoned runner, so someone who's like been running for a little while, pretty average, nothing crazy, not putting up crazy times. So maybe you're 38, 39 minutes in the 5 mile and maybe you're 13:45, 14:15 in the 2 mile. You could expect somewhere in the range of 30 to 60 seconds, maybe even 90 seconds off of your 2 mile. You could expect anywhere from 2 to 4 minutes or so off of your 5 mile. And again, don't hold me to these. Like, don't say like, oh, you said I was going to improve this much. I don't have control of all the variables, guys. So like, these are just potential predictions. They're not set in stone. Some people might improve more than this. Some people might improve less than this. But based on my experience, based on science, based on what is actually possible, these are my predictions of what is possible. So, and then finally, we have a more advanced runner that's probably running a 34, 33 minute 5 mile and a 12:15, 12:45, 2 mile or something like that. This type of runner could probably take off 20 to 30 seconds off of their 2 mile and something like 1 to 2, maybe 3 minutes off of their 5 mile. So don't think of those numbers as gospel. Don't think that they're set in stone. They are just a potential prediction on how much you can improve if you follow the program very closely and you take your lifestyle outside the gym seriously and you don't do all the things that I just said not to do. You can expect to improve by approximately that much. Again, some people might be way faster. They might make much bigger progress. Some people might make smaller progress. It really just depends on lots and lots of variables. So it's hard to give a really solid answer to that one. I would also expect if you eat enough and you adhere to the program very, very closely, I would expect you to at least maintain your strength. You might lose a little bit of strength in certain exercises, like exercises that aren't in the program, but that's more of a skill thing. Once you get back to doing those exercises, you'll make neurological adaptations pretty quickly and potentially gain that strength back. But I would expect if you've been lifting for a while, you've been running for a while, and you have pretty solid habits, I would at minimum expect to maintain most of your strength and most of the movements that are in the program. And you definitely can expect to improve your calisthenics as well as your hex bar deadlift, your plank durations and whatnot. But I wouldn't expect to just put 50 pounds on your squat or 50 pounds on your bench press. You won't even see bench press in the program, but that's what you can kind of expect from a strength perspective. And yeah, that is it. Again, this program will be on sale until Friday at midnight. Friday is the 19th of July. So hopefully that clears everything up. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that episode and got a good idea of what the program looks like. And looking forward to hearing some feedback on how the program goes for you guys. Don't hesitate to reach out as you go through the program if you have specific questions that weren't answered in this podcast, or if you want to update me on how things are going or anything like that. That would be awesome. So that is going to wrap it up, guys. Thank you very much for listening. I will be back soon with another episode. Until then, Terminator out.